What I would now like to do is start our session 3, so part 3. So earlier this afternoon, you would have heard Natalie Isaac refer to a number of consumer trends. And these trends are impacting choices and diets right around the world and will present some challenges and some opportunities for us. Now, how successfully our industry can tap into these behaviours will determine the continuing relevance of red meat to consumers and, of course, the prosperity of our Australian red meat businesses. So what we're going to do now, we're going to hear from 3 of MLA's in-market experts. And what we want to demonstrate here is how we bundle on-the-ground knowledge with lots of data and insights and how they underpin our marketing programs and what we're doing to keep Australian red meat front of mind. So welcome back, Mr. Michael Finucan, our General Manager for International Markets, knows a lot about a lot of markets. I'd also like to welcome Andrew Cox, probably a familiar face to many of you. Andrew Cox is our International Business Manager for North Asia, with direct responsibility for the key markets of Japan and Korea. And finally, I'd like to welcome Jeff Ng. Jeff is MLA's National Category Manager, looking after all the retail channels in the Australian market. Now, Jeff won't be a familiar face. He's quite new to Meat and Livestock Australia. He joined the Australian team in May this year, but has over 20 years' experience in sales and marketing. He steps in for Graham Yardy, our domestic market manager, who's currently very busy on paternity leave. So welcome, gentlemen. We can get through this. Now, let's see how I go. Can I get through it? Okay. So we've heard these references to the Global Consumer Tracker, and we conduct this tracker across 16 key markets to better understand the protein landscape, consumer perceptions, and competitor strengths. And what we see actually across all these markets, that what's common is this consumer desire for safe, for natural, and for healthy. But red meat markets are all at really different stages of development. And indeed, red meat has a really different place in the repertoire. And I guess natural and healthy can mean really different things to those consumers. So Michael, as I described, you know a lot about a lot of markets. How do you see safe, natural and healthy in a market such as the US and perhaps China?
Yeah, so I thought I'd start off in Asia, and you know, our safety and natural message is just so strong in those in Asia. And if you look at China, they've had a number of food scares. If you look at a Chinese housewife, she just wants to give her kid the best, the safest, the most trusted, the most natural product. So it's a really strong driver, and I think it's a key message that we've got to keep focusing on in those Asian markets. If you move across to the US, it's a different consumer and a different focus. Natural means different things. So if you're looking at a millennial, a young, urban, affluent consumer, you know, natural and healthy provides a different driver, and sustainability and environment are now being built into that. But those consumers are looking for that premium grass-fed or a lamb product that tells that story for them. So really strong messages. Safety is critical in Asia, but that natural and healthy is more in those developed markets.
So Jeff, speaking of developed markets, you're lucky enough to be working in the home market of Australia. What does healthy mean, and what does natural mean?
Yes, well, Lisa, I guess one thing we should point out that health is a major macro trend that we're seeing in the marketplace, and it's basically growing in importance. But when you think about health, it is actually means different things, I guess, to different people. When I think about health, I hear messages in the media, you know, low sugar, low protein, high protein diets, low fats, high fats, good fats, superfoods. The list goes on and on. So it's no wonder that it's actually absolutely confusing for consumers out in the marketplace. But I guess one thing that we do know, though, is that 85% of our shoppers out there are actively seeking to improve their diet. And they are doing that through either limitation or restricting of certain food types in the marketplace. So today, 70% of shoppers actually claim they are reducing sugary foods as their way of managing their health. And obviously that is the poster child of key health issues in the marketplace. And whilst 21% actually claim that they're reducing red meat in their diet, the good news here is that that number has been stable over the past 3 years. So it's not the burning issue when it comes to managing health issues, when it comes to managing your diet. So another point, though, is that consumers also identify natural as being healthy. And natural is also recognised as being, free from. Some consumers actually identify grass-fed as being very natural, no hormones or being unprocessed as being identified as natural. And I guess the good news here is that grain-fed is seen as authentically natural. And particularly with organic foods and no hormone foods, seen as even being more healthy and safe. So I guess at MLA, what we've been doing with both retailers and suppliers, we've been trying to promote smaller portion sizes, for example. We've been introducing and promoting much healthier and lighter meal options in terms of food inspiration. And we've also been promoting and supporting a lot of the organic and grass-fed brands out there in the marketplace as well. In fact, I just ran the latest home scan data to October, where I captured all the grass-fed and all the organic meat sales for beef and lamb. It's now recording a massive growth of 135% in the last 12 months.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So, Andrew, I understand healthy is also a driver in a market like Japan, but there's also a few other sort of influences at play that have presented some new opportunities for Australian beef. Do you want to sort of talk us through, I guess, health and what opportunities that's presented for us in Japan?
Yep, so g'day everyone. So Japan's really defied the economic expectations in the last 2 years. Australian exports are up around 20%. Our largest competitor's up over 20%. So the Japanese are eating a lot more beef than, off already a high base than they were previously. And what they're calling it over there is a Niku boom, a meat boom. And largely that's been driven by females. So females, maybe like all over the world, tend to be a little more health conscious than the blokes. And females in Japan are increasingly more conscious of the fact that lean red meat, lean protein, particularly healthy proteins such as Australian beef, all of which is counted as lean by them, whether it's marble score 5, 4, etc. or less. And so that's really driven a very strong trend towards imported beef. And another trend over in Japan is that there's more of a trend towards Western dining, so steaks, roast beef, great opportunities for Australian beef. And I guess, Lisa, the key really for us is that's a trend, but from a marketing perspective, how do we take ownership, or what's the way in for Australian beef which is different from our competitors? And for us in Japan, alongside the popularity of our product, the consumer popularity, awareness of our health, and what we call Genki over there, the fact that Australian beef can help you and your family feel healthy and active. But another trend that we noticed with the data is that our main competitor, of course, US beef, as they enter the Northern Hemisphere summer, there tends to be a big spike in the price of that product, obviously, because Americans tend to turn on their grills. And over the long term, there's always been a sort of 30 or 40% spike in the price of American loin cuts. And obviously we have the converse season, and generally Australians are barbecuing a little less, making more availability for Australian loin cuts. So with those two, with the knowledge of those two things in mind, for the last 4 years we've been heavily promoting Australian beef around this concept of Genki, but specifically in summertime, because we know that in the long term, if we can associate our product with summertime, then Australian beef and Australian beef producers will benefit through increased demand.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I like my food, and yes, I like natural and healthy, but I also know that consumers want more. We know that variety is fundamentally linked to our enjoyment of food. And what we're seeing across a number of our markets is what I would describe as a growing number of variety-seeking consumers. They want new food experiences. So Jeff, thinking about the home market, what are we seeing here in Australia with respect to variety?
Well, I've always said that variety is the spice of life. And whilst we understand from our consumer segmentation, there are defined consumer segments out there that basically that we understand their attitudes and basically the way they think about feeding their family. But in our recent shopper research, we've actually uncovered or unlocked some really interesting insights, and it can be just pictured in the form of a Rubik's Cube. So in other words, there are 3 areas in which we are seeing behaviour, seeing areas of drivers that drive behaviour in the marketplace. The first one fundamentally is the occasion, the meal occasion, and that could simply be your midweek meal. No surprise there, you'd be probably after a budget meal or something that's going to be convenient, to your weekend meal, where obviously there would be a lot more relaxation and your guard is down a bit there to enjoy something a bit more indulgent, to having people over, where obviously there's going to be a bit more of a gourmet experience that you would want to plate up. Another area that is driving behaviour, again, no surprise here, is household size. If you guys been into the major capital cities, you would have seen the number of apartments being built around the place. So the sheer number of single or dual income households in the marketplace is absolutely astronomical. In fact, the latest statistics suggest it's 2 in 10 households now, 1 or 2 people dwellings. And the third area is actually the area or the level of cultural influence. And I'm going to put myself on the spot here because I'm clearly an Asian, and I'm actually married to a local Aussie, so we classify ourselves, and this is what's coming out in the market research, as this mixed influence. But I guess the spectrum here is that you have your typical Aussie family to your mixed arrangement, and then all the way through to obviously a lot of overseas-born people living in Australia. They bring such different levels of culture and cooking influences as to what motivates what protein to cook and buy. So again, putting my example on the table here, I'm a family of 2 working adults and 2 teenagers, so I'll be seeking for a midweek meal, probably something that is going to be convenient to cook and probably something that is going to be acceptable for all of us to eat. And then also making sure that because of my Asian influence, I probably would seek a meat cut that will be suitable for a more Asian style cooking that is probably quick and compatible to the different sauces and vegetables. So that motivation is quite different to the weekend, where my guard is down and I'm much more prepared to indulge in something a lot more extravagant, like having a nice Scotch fillet, and then it might only just be myself and my wife because the teenage kids are gone off, as we all would experience. So you can see in that example there are so many different combinations of meal occasions and motivations, and hence the strong move towards such high degrees of variety that we actually seek. So I guess to answer your question, Lisa, I believe there's a huge opportunity for the category, for the red meat category to grow in this. But I guess the challenge is that we need to unlock those different segments or permutations of household size, cultural influence, and those occasions to bring those to our shoppers in a more relevant way.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for the personal disclosure about what happens in your house. So, Michael, you don't have to go to the same level of personal disclosure, but just thinking about a couple of our export markets, are you seeing this variety-seeking behaviour, and is it a threat or an opportunity for Australian red meat?
So I'm going to talk about millennials. So
millennial bingo.
Not,
Bing! First one today, I think.
So look, in that US market, those millennials are definitely looking for a different experience, and they're looking for that diversification in what they eat. And we're seeing products like goat and lamb being part of that. It's a new experience. It's a different dining experience. They're experimenting with new cuisines, and it ticks all the boxes. It's new, it's trendy, it's healthy. So, it's a really positive there. So those trends are really resonating in the US, and we're able to capture some of those markets. If we look at some other markets, like the Middle East, we're seeing a change there also in that those consumers looking for differentiation. Traditionally, they'd be eating a lamb product, quite lean, slow cooked on a bed of rice. But through our global tracker research, we asked the question about fat clusters. So what do they think about fat and meat or marbling? So in the Middle East, we're seeing that they are willing to eat a fatter product, and they are willing to pay more for it. And saw Matt's presentation and some of those trends. So we're targeting those. We're seeing a strong growth in grain-fed product in the Middle East market to meet that desire and that need from the consumer.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So we heard from John not long ago from Alibaba. So I won't talk too much about online, other than to have a few sort of stats up here for you. But what we know is that this is an area that is absolutely predicted to grow, and you can see the statistics. But sometimes we think about the on and the offline worlds. And I guess, Andrew, you and I have been having lots of conversations since you've been back home. And you were really sharing with me some examples from retailers who are not thinking about one or the other, and how they're starting to realise some of these opportunities. Do you want to just maybe talk us through what you're seeing in market?
Yeah, okay. So in Korea and also in Japan, you've got all the factors and fundamentals that to really foster online shopping. Firstly, of course, you've got a very highly urbanised population. So Tokyo's metro area is 32 million people, so larger than Australia's population, just in metro Tokyo. And Seoul is not far behind, about 25 million. So you've got that mass of people. You've also got very, very good chilled supply chains, same-day delivery nationally in both those countries usually. And the third factor is you've got very high-speed internet, and you've got access to it. So maybe one day with the NBN, we might have the same level of access, but in North Asia, they're already there. And that obviously has led people to purchasing online. But I think the key trend is convenience. So that online trend, a lot of times, is actually driven by existing bricks and mortar retailers, they're called. So the larger existing retailers with an online portal. And then other retailers have responded. So I think one of the photos you'll see there is actually 7-Eleven in Korea. Obviously, you'd call a traditional convenience store. But they've recently started trialling Australian beef steaks, single-serve packets, in an area of retail that we've never really been in, and their competitors have followed as well. So you've got the traditional guys responding, and then you do have the more, let's say, high-tech solutions. So another photo there, you'll see two of our Korean team. They're showing me how you can order Australian beef from a Samsung fridge. So that's not a concept, that's for sale in the store, and they just went into the menu and showed me how that can be done. So I don't know what the sales are. Obviously, that's a truly new technology. But I think the meaning or the implication for us as an industry is of course, we still need to work with that existing supply chain because they're modernising as well as everyone else. But the game changer possibly is these technology companies. So the tech providers and the Samsungs of this world that we probably haven't really worked with in their tech division, the white goods suppliers, they're now getting, because of technology, they're more involved in the supply chain than they ever were. So I think fundamentally for our industry, we need to start developing more relationships. We need to be tech savvy, and we need to work with people that would never have been on our radar before.
I think, Andrew, you raised something really important. It's all underpinned by this consumer desire for convenience. Jeff, sorry to pick on you again, but it's a market that I know very well. But certainly through some of our work, I can see a significant shift, even in the last 4 years, around the way Australians are planning meals, where they're eating their meals, who they're eating with. Do you want to maybe just share with us some of the shifts that we're seeing within the Australian market, and I guess similarly some implications for the supply chain, but also for marketing tactics?
Sure. Yes, I mean, there's no surprise. This change in shopper behaviour is symptomatic from some of the key macro trends that we're experiencing around technology, the environment, with regards to technology, obviously, and society. But what's really coming out of that, the so what out of all of that, is that there is a generation of these time optimizers, I like to call it. And to give you an example of what I mean by that, we do have this always-on culture, and there's this real blur between work and leisure. And some scary statistics that just came out of the recent Ernst & Young research suggest that in Australia, we spend on average 10 hours a day on some form of digital online approach, be it on your phone, be it at work on your PC, be it home on your tablet. And the millennials, again, they are leading the charge. They literally are checking their digital device upon waking and literally all the way through upon sleeping. And if there's anybody in here that would probably put their hand up to saying the same thing, it just does give you an example of the change in our behaviour. And I guess the key thing out of all this is that, again, key figures are showing that we are eating out, buying takeaway, or having food brought in more than ever in Australia. And again, millennials are leading that agenda. They're spending now more than $100 a week. $100 a week. And that's actually up about 40% from 6 years ago. So that's just an astronomical amount of money to be spending on takeaways. Just imagine how much they could be saving to pay off their home loan. But anyway...
you really want those children to leave home, don't you, Jeff?
So, I think the interesting thing here is that the traditional, or evidence of the traditional way of cooking and preparing for your meal, it certainly has changed. Let's think about the meal solutions. When I go and think about dinner tonight, I have so many different options available to me. I can walk into a store and buy something that's basically ready to eat. I can then also buy something that we call it ready to heat, so you can literally throw it in the microwave. You can have pre-prepared food that you can simply assemble, or you could do the old-fashioned thing and cook from scratch from some actual fresh meat. But then I've got a multitude of retail options to choose from as well. Anywhere from going to the supermarket. I mean, today I can just walk up to Woolworths today and select a meal kit where there's these simple solutions where I click or select my protein, I select my vegetable, I select my sauce and then my starch, and it's all in a bag, and I basically check out on my self-checkout and I'm home ready to cook. To the other extreme of food service, I mean, I think we've all heard about Menulog and Uber Eats, but I had a bit of a test. I had a search in my local suburb, which is Lane Cove, which is, I guess, an inner city suburb. I had at my disposal 62 restaurants that will deliver to me within 35 minutes. I mean, the options now are just absolutely gargantuan. And then, of course, there's all the subscription models, the Hello Freshes, the Marley Spoons, and I think you've probably seen on TV all the light and easy type options that you can have delivered to your home. So what I'm just trying to paint here is that the landscape of you actually consuming and buying and where you buy is just changed dramatically in the Australian landscape. And I guess to answer your question, Lisa, about so what are the implications of this? We really do need to think about things differently. So, for example, in food service, we do need to work with our trading customers on developing food options that will be more relevant in this space. Our executive chef, Sam Burke, for example, has been developing better cooking techniques to improve yields, for example, to drive both the benefits of taste and convenience, but more importantly, profitability for that particular channel. In the case of my channel that I'm quite dedicated to in terms of supermarkets, how do I connect with those shoppers through their journey from leaving their home all the way to the supermarket aisle or to the butcher, influencing them along the way so that they actually choose a red meat option for their dinner tonight. And I guess the biggest challenge, in my opinion, is that in today's environment where I see that big sea of red at the supermarket, how do we better present that category to meet those changes that I just talked about in terms of all the different options and the way in which we shop and consume?
So making sure we don't lose anyone in that final 50 centimetres for those who are still shopping in bricks and mortar. Certainly getting a sense of a very changing environment, absolutely enabled by technology and certainly desire for variety and the need for convenience. Mr. Finucan, anything you'd like to add on what you're seeing around this desire for convenience and supply chain implications?
Yeah, so convenience is incredibly important across Southeast Asia and in China. If you spend any time at these big cities and you're stuck in traffic in these big cities, you know, you look at Jakarta or Beijing, it's time consuming. So having someone deliver something straight to your door is just such a saving. There's a whole range of e-delivery platforms, and in Jakarta there's companies such as Gojek that will deliver anything from fresh vegetables right through to a cooked meal to your door. So it's becoming more prevalent. It's all on apps, and it's becoming the way of life. But John mentioned it before, this online-offline concept where the online retailers are also building bricks and mortar shops where consumers can still come and look, touch and feel the product, but they can also experience it. They're eating in store after they're shopping while their groceries are being delivered home. So there's this merging of the online and offline world. Asian consumers like to touch and feel their produce before they buy it, and they can still go and experience what they're going to get, but they can be confident that when they buy it online, it is the product that they've seen delivered home. So yeah, it's a major trend in that region.
Thank you, Michael. I'm just going to talk generally about the desire for protein, and we've heard this on a few occasions today. Beef is a very popular protein. Up front, you would remember Natalie talking about the long-term trend, and in fact, I believe only 7 of the last 28 years have not been a global record for beef consumption. And despite some of those headwinds that Nat spoke of, the outlook is in fact very positive, and we do expect to see those records continue to tumble. And of course, a similar outlook for sheep meat. We've just got to remember though, we are a fairly small player in the protein landscape. And just a really quick visual here, just to help us understand, you know, we are a small player. We're a big business here in Australia. We're a mighty industry for Australia, but quite a small player. And here's just a little example there of China, when we look at China's total consumption in this instance of sheep meat. And then we look at what they import in the purple. Then we look at what Australia exports. And then we look at our share of that total consumption. It's an example, but just to give you an idea. It's certainly a stark reminder of our size and our impact. Michael, you have been marketing red meat in our export and international markets for over 10 years. I mean, how would you describe, we've heard a few references to this competitive intensity. I mean, how would you describe the environment right now?
Yeah, so as Lisa said, we're a small producer on the global scale. 3% of the beef is global production of beef is Australian, and 7% of the sheep meat. So we're a small producer, but we're a major exporter, so we're exposed to all those global trends and global competitors in that space. And export's critically important to us. So we need to be very tactical and very direct and targeted on where we're going to focus our energies and where we're going to find customers for our product. We need to be very targeted on telling our story. You think about that China story. There are a lot of competitors in that space. There's the Brazilians, Uruguayans continue to grow in that market as the market grows. And a lot of people look at market share and go, oh, we're losing market share. But I say, look at the sectors that we're playing and the products that we're putting into that market. It's way more important to know where you are and be very targeted on where we can best capture value for Australia.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Now, Andrew, I want to ask you the question that you and I have been talking a little bit over the years. We've been working together. We hear all the time that the future growth for beef and sheep meat is principally going to be coming from those developing markets. Natalie referenced Asia in particular, but perhaps not the part of Asia that you're directly responsible for. You know, when we look at the economic factors, particularly a market like Japan, very, very soft economic outlook, low or no or declining population growth. Key market, one of our biggest markets for investment. Are we going to see growth in a traditional market like Japan?
Yeah, so that's obviously a fairly common question for those operating in Japan and Korea to a lesser extent. And it's understandable in our industry given, as you say, there's some very exciting things happening in the more developing markets where you've got economy and population growth opportunities. So, I mean, my answer to that is that these, if you look at Japan and Korea, the value of our beef and sheep meat exports to those markets is around 4 billion Australian dollars, and that's really hard won. That took decades. So the Australian Meat Board opened an office in Tokyo I believe, in 1965, and Korea wasn't so long afterwards. So that position that we have in these markets is extremely hard won, and they're also extremely competitive markets. So Japan and Korea are two of the top three markets for our American friends as well, and they're aggressively trying to win back market share. So we've got this position, and it's built on country of origin. So in both Japan and Korea, country of origin is by far the number one driver for people who are buying meat at retail and often food service as well. And we also know from the research that Australian beef is number one with consumers. So it's number one for health reasons. It's trusted to be number one. It's number one in trust. And it's also all the other measures that we collect, such as suitability for families and that sort of natural positioning that we tend to have in these markets. And so it's this knowledge that with this knowledge we're able to make some good ground in marketing. So many of you would have read or heard about our largest chilled grain-fed customer in Korea, Costco supermarkets last year. They decided to switch nearly entirely from Australian to the US, which is not at all a surprise to us. You know, American retailer sells American beef. It's kind of certainly not unexpected for us. But with the knowledge that we are number one with the consumer across those attributes, we were able to really quickly go into the competitors of Costco and offer a really strong package with them, built on the fundamental consumer trust and preference for our beef. And we were able to fairly quickly replace that chilled grain-fed sales in retail with their competitors. So it's that fundamental is what we rely on with our country of origin marketing. Obviously supported in market by True Aussie beef labelling in Japan and Korea. And what that label does is fundamentally allow consumers to shortcut the selection process to a product that they're looking for in retailers and food service. So the trust that we've built over the decades is what triggers our marketing strategies in both Japan and Korea, and it really is a strategy that's aimed towards communicating those strengths to the hundreds of millions of consumers that we have in those markets.
Thank you. Well, so far we've looked at consumer needs, both global and market specific, and we've really looked at sort of that growing demand for safe, for natural, for healthy, and need for variety and convenience. And we looked just very quickly at the global trade landscape, and a quick example there of, I guess, the competitive intensity with the US re-entry back into a market such as Korea. But meeting consumers' rational needs is not always enough, and we did have a question from the floor on this earlier. There is no doubt that some consumers are asking a lot more questions than ever before they pick up a product. This is not a trend that is unique to the Australian red meat industry. The world over, consumers, particularly enabled by technology, can find out more information about products and services. And often one of the questions they're asking is this product produced ethically? Is it produced sustainably? Does this product support what I, as an individual, might believe in? Is it a brand or a product that's aligned with my personal values? Now, this trend is called ethics-based purchasing. But again, not dissimilar to, I guess, my question around healthy and natural, ethics and sustainability, it may not be important for all consumers in all markets. And I guess maybe I might just start with, you, Andrew. Are you seeing any evidence of this ethics-based purchasing in perhaps our North Asian markets?
Yeah, I mean, we are. It's a global trend. You have to say it's not as topical in Japan and Korea as it might be in Australia or Europe or US, but it's becoming more topical. So what we're doing in Japan and Korea is we're working with major customers who also need to be ahead of these issues. So your McDonald's of this world, major retailers, Aeon, for instance, in Japan, and governments, and we're working to make sure that we demonstrate our sustainability credentials. So actually in February we'll hold a symposium where we'll launch the Beef Sustainability Framework in Japanese language for those concerned citizens, consumers and other parties. But the caveat is that in those North Asian markets the trend is probably not quite as topical as it is in other countries.
Michael, how about you? You're based in Singapore now, and you shared an anecdote with me a couple of months ago which caught my ear around perhaps the job to be done on communicating our ethical and sustainable practices.
Yeah, so traditionally in Southeast Asia, the sustainability and environment message isn't as strong at the moment, so it's more about food safety, freshness or family favourite. But in Singapore, we're really seeing a shift. These more developed markets with consumers with more disposable incomes, a real shift. So I was running a innovation workshop up in Singapore recently. We're looking at some new product development, and we're trying to bring in some new food companies, some fast-moving consumer good companies, and some innovators and new startup companies. And when we started talking to them and talking about red meat, they're going, "Oh, we don't get it. It's all about plant-based meats, cell-based meats. What are you talking about? Red meat, that's old." But when we sat down and really explained to them that our core message is around where it comes from, the clean and safe environment that we produce it in, the quality of the product, the safety of the product, and the nutrition and naturalness of our product, they really woke up and started resonating that, oh wow, we've sort of not thought about that, and there is something we can do with your product. So it's just about changing the message and reminding people what we are. We are a natural, healthy product, and we've just got to get better at telling that message.
Okay, so Jeff, talk us through the Australian consumer landscape and ethics-based purchasing.
Yeah, well, our research certainly suggests that consumers have never been more interested as to where their food comes from. So, and no surprise, that's been enabled through the high degree of technology. Anywhere now you can basically source information as to where your brands come from, basically what products and services are available to you. So the level of transparency and information is basically 24/7 today. But something really interesting, we've only just finished another piece of insight around trying to understand what is it that shoppers find important actually at the coalface when they're physically in store, when they're physically purchasing a product. And the first note that I would make, though, is that there's clear evidence where grocery items with sustainability claims, we are experiencing, or those suppliers are experiencing double-digit growth. So this is basically where this is coming from. So we basically ask consumers as to what is important to them when they actually purchase red meat. And surprisingly, when it comes to environmental claims, it is actually the 5th ranked item of importance after freshness, provenance, basic product information, and nutrition. It's the 5th most important ranked item. I guess I don't want to sound complacent here, because the watch out here is that it's those millennials again who have greater levels of awareness and have the greatest vocal in terms of what's going on with regards to sustainability. They are actually wanting more information on nutrition and if it is actually right for them personally. And they obviously are taking much more personal responsibility on the environment, and it is growing in importance. So I guess the key thing here is that the way I'm interpreting this is that ethics or sustainability messages is not yet a burning issue for decision-making for red meat. But I do really believe, though, this does need to stay on the radar, because obviously this is going to become a growing issue as those millennials come through to an older life stage and making more and more household decisions.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I think certainly within the portfolio I'm responsible for at MLA, it does extend to not just consumer marketing but community engagement. And it is a question, I think Damien, may have been Damien who said it, who asked the question earlier today. What are we doing? What are we doing to tell people about our product And this isn't necessarily the consumer message that it's tasty, it's quick, it's convenient, it pairs beautifully with a variety of spices. It's actually for those members of the community and some red meat consumers, they are curious, and there is a small number, but it is a growing number who have concerns. So it is critically important that we're not just marketing our benefits to our current consumer base, that we're investing more in programs to engage the community. And really, and the slide here sort of says it all, our job is to ensure that we're doing a bit of myth busting. So one of the ways we do this, we have a platform called Good Meat. And Good Meat's an online platform that actually all the questions that maybe your neighbours asked you, or a niece or a cousin, or of the 4 children, one was a vegetarian. They've got these questions. We need to have a place where people who are seeking that information can find it with no bullshit. It calls it as it is, and it showcases what we do as an industry from paddock all the way through to processing. So that's one part of our community engagement. What's really important, though, is you are hearing and occasionally seeing some very noisy voices who are very anti-red meat. We do track this very, very closely. We have been doing this tracking for 9 years. I can assure you that producers remain very trusted. So as part of our community engagement efforts, we know how important it is to put the producer at the heart of the campaigns, be that virtually, through schools programs. And the reason the producer is so important, I have the privilege of knowing a lot of producers, and I know how much you care for your land. It makes good sense. And I know why we need to care for our animals, for a variety of reasons, but certainly in terms of those wonderful eating quality outcomes. But I know you, I get to ask you those questions. I know you're good people, but most people in the city have never visited a farm, and there is a really big gap between the only people who are putting money into our value chain, the consumers, and you, the producer. So we want to put the producer at the heart of our community engagement campaign. We do that through a program, Good Meat Online, but we go and we meet the people and we take our producer advocates to the people. We'll do this at fine food festivals, royal shows. Through our consumer segmentation, we're pretty good at knowing which parts of the community and which of our consumers have concerns. So we don't do a big ad, because the vast majority of your consumers today trust you and are very confident in what you're doing. But there is a group who have concerns. So we are very targeted and we provide the information, no BS, so they can see what we do. We're actually launching, we do have something called a virtual paddock to plate tour. We have had one for beef, and it's had over 32,000 views in the past 12 months, a way of connecting the producer. They can put the goggles on. They can see everything that happens on a farm, on a truck, in a feedlot, in an abattoir. New levels of transparency. And actually this week we're launching a similar virtual reality paddock to plate tour for lamb. So you will see the Good Meat bus in and around the Realm Hotel. Please check it out. I have stressed the importance of putting the producer at the heart of our myth busting and community engagement. But we actually know there are lots of other influences in the community and the consumers. There are the NGOs, the RSPCA, the World Wildlife Fund. We do engage with those groups. We share information on our policies, our programs and our practices. It's very important that we keep the dialogue open. We also know that healthcare professionals are influencers, and we work very closely with them. We provide the evidence on red meat consumption. And indeed, more recently, we've provided the evidence on highly processed plant-based alternatives, high in salt. The environmental footprint for some of these products is nowhere near as favourable as you would appear, so we are doing that work. I guess at the other extreme, we actually know who influences consumers a great deal are celebrities and social media bloggers. And we are working quite closely with some quite major, particularly chef celebrities. They endorse our product. Recently, we've just completed a piece of work with Curtis Stone. And yes, while he talks about the quality of our product, it's actually about talking about the quality of our producers, of our care and our craft, and taking that message into the US market, where he has a very high profile, and sustainability is a concern. Equally, Curtis will be doing some work here for us in the Australian market. And for our lamb products, we are also engaging, chef influencers. These people are also seeking to understand sustainable practices and want to align their own personal brand with quality product such as red meat. I do want to stress again, in the Australian market, this is very topical. It's very topical. We do monitor this very, very closely. What we also know is that vast majority of consumers, even those who have a level of concern, where they put their trust is often in the big retailers, the supermarket chains, or the fast food business. And what they expect is that a McDonald's or a major retailer, that they have interrogated the supply chain. They have checked all the way back to the farm that the product has been, produced ethically, sustainably. Now, those customers, their brand is on the line, okay? So the third part of, I guess, our overall engagement exercise is to work very closely with those customers and to provide them with hard data and evidence on production practices and to show, to report against those and to show continuous improvement. So Andrew made that reference to the beef industry sustainability framework. I can't tell you how important a report like that is each year is for us. Our customers demand it. It's what we can use with the NGOs. The policymakers are looking for it. So yes, there are plenty of questions. We have good practices. It's important that we continue to ensure they're aligned with community expectations and that we have the evidence to report against that. I mean, this is the environment in which we trade in. And I neglected to mention that investors in this industry, particularly global investors, are also looking for the evidence on the sustainable practices of the industry. So I have jumped in there, but that's an area that I'm directly responsible for. And I know there is a lot of questions around the sort of things we're reading in the papers and the questions that we're being asked. So we've gone right to time. However, there is one final opportunity for questions of any of our panellists. I know it's been a long session. Miho, we'll come to you, sir.
Yeah, John Buxton,
Sign
East
John.
Gippsland.
Thank you.
Lisa, have MLA got in touch with the leaders of the paleo food movement? Have you spoken to any of those people? It's a surprisingly big trend. I've been to some of their seminars in the St Kilda Town Hall. It's a big hall, and you go to some of their seminars there and it's chock-a-block and the energy in the room's quite surprising. Yeah. It's actually a really good story for red meat.
Yeah. Thank you, John. We do keep in touch with, also certainly aware of paleo and do keep very close to what's happening there. We have to be very careful as a government, the way we're funded, to always be very responsible in our promotion of red meat. So we'll make sure that healthcare professionals, food bloggers, and indeed, there are proponents of particular diets, we'll make sure they've got the evidence on red meat. They know its nutritional composition and that they have the facts. We would be unlikely to partner with some of the very high-profile celebrities of those diets because perhaps certainly through the view of many leading nutritionists and nutrition policymakers, that's perhaps a little bit irresponsible. So we'll provide them with the data and evidence, but we don't. I couldn't stand here next to Mr. Pete Evans. But we do make sure everybody has the information. Thank you. We have just one down here, Mihai, thank you.
Just wondering, has there been any study done bearing in mind that our processing sector, relative to the rest of the world, is whilst efficient, the cost of energy to the processing sector and the possible increases in costs that are destroying manufacturing in this country. Is there any work being done in keeping or trying to keep the pressure on government to keep those costs of energy down.
Yeah, I might be
Yeah, just-
reasonably well placed to speak to that. So Andrew McCallum made reference to some joint programs between the production sector and the processing sector, and as a result of, we've got reasonably good visibility about some of the projects in the processing sector, and also within MLA's own portfolio. So I know within the processing sector, there's been a review of energy use and indeed reduction in energy use over time, but multiplying that with the costs. And I'm not speaking on behalf, I don't know if this time of day whether we have anyone from the processing representative bodies here in the room, but in terms of advocacy priorities for the processing sector, I know if Pat Hutchinson from AMIC was standing here, next to Labor, that is of enormous importance to the processing sector. So MLA does work on what we can do to improve efficiency within processing, and I know there has been a recent study on energy use, and it is an advocacy priority. Thank you, Miho.
Thank you. Robert Herman from Mercado. I like your reference to evidence and science and data. Is there any efforts to talk about HGPs in that light? Because the major push on HGPs is negative, and it's from people who are in the industry, so supermarkets. It doesn't help the industry, and there doesn't seem to be any debate or evidence put up to try and counter those negative messages.
Oh, shall I give it a shot? I firmly believe, and I made the point briefly, that there is only one person putting money into the value chain, and that is the consumer. And rightly or wrongly, Robert, what we are seeing with a lot of our work is that natural means no HGPs, you know, and that's what consumers believe and what consumers understand. And and the retailers and others are responding to those consumer needs. There may be a weight of evidence, but consumers are not always rational. Now, we love our data and evidence at Meat and Livestock Australia, but we know consumers are not always rational. So you could have all the science on the benefits of HGP, but if that HGP is linked to productivity gains, this consumer, that's not what they're interested in. They're worried about what they put in their body. Okay, so you could present them with the science, but emotionally, they don't like the idea of that type of, a growth promotant. Okay, so, this is really being led by consumers. They're wanting natural, they're wanting unadulterated. Yes, there is evidence, but I would suggest it would be very, very difficult to turn back the tide for consumer perception, whether it's rational or irrational. That's certainly the consumer perception, and I don't know whether any of my colleagues...
It's, again, the consumer around the world is different, and their perceptions and their desires are different. But, in the US, that grass-fed program is a hormone-free, natural program, and that's what's resonating with those millennials and those higher value shoppers. So you just got to look at every sector and target it with what the consumer wants.
Any further questions? Or you are stayers. Thank you all who are here to the bitter end. It has been a very long afternoon. I hope you found it to be informative. We've covered a lot of territory. Can I just remind you, please, to complete your evaluation forms, and don't forget to grab your USB stick on the way out for more and more information. For anyone in the room who is attending the welcome dinner this evening, there is a bus that leaves from outside the foyer at 5:45 p.m, so put your glad rags on if you are attending the welcome dinner. I'd really like to thank you all for your attention this afternoon, and please enjoy the rest of Red Meat 2018. Thank you.